to welcome Scott Ritter back, and I want to welcome Angry Warhog back to the Real True Talk. Go ahead and start if you want, James, and then I'll follow you.
Okay. Thank you, Juan. Once again, it's good to be here, Scott. So thanks for being here with us and taking our questions. So first question I have is, why are the fortifications in and around Bakhmut so hard to crack? And how do they fight behind these defenses? As in the defenders, how do they fight behind their fortifications?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that these are fortifications that are literally 8 years in the making. So the Ukrainians have been digging in for 8 straight years, preparing for this very kind of event. Anybody who's done any training or for a select few actual operations against the reduction of a built-up area, taking out a pillbox, taking out trench lines, etc., knows that it's extraordinarily difficult and dangerous work. Even in training, going through the initial assault, everybody dies because you make a mistake. You get focused on taking out the pillbox at the front, and you forget that there's flanking fire to the left, and you haven't suppressed it, and now you get in an exposed position, you all die. Fortunately, it's training, you get to reset and do it over again until you make the next mistake. The Russians and the Ukrainians are involved in something that you don't get a reset. When you make the mistake, you die. Which explains why the Russians aren't maybe doing this as aggressively as perhaps the Marine Corps would. I believe the Marine Corps would have reduced these positions, in a matter of weeks. We would have suffered horrific casualties doing so, but we would have done so because we're not an institution that likes to sit back and wait. We very aggressively move forward, very aggressively maneuver, and things of that nature. But we pay a price. That's why there's a memorial to Marines in Washington, D.C. About Iwo Jima, thousands that died there. The Russians aren't in the business of building more memorials. They're in the business of killing Ukrainians. And what's happening with Bakhmut is the Russians have created what one could call the perfect storm for them. They are in absolute control of the scenario. They have the enemy fixed in positional warfare, where the Russians enjoy an overwhelming supremacy in artillery. And therefore, as long as the enemy wants to replace dead bodies with new bodies so they can become dead bodies, and they replace them with new bodies and become dead bodies, the Russians will do this all day long. The Russians aren't in any hurry to assault a fortified position that's occupied with living fighters, because while they will probably prevail, there'll be a battlefield littered with Russian bodies. The Russians don't want to have that outcome. Right now, they're pleased, I think, with the situation they face. The Ukrainians continue to put fresh troops in, and these fresh troops are decimated. We're talking a battalion or two a day. Imagine the casualty rate. If 1st Marine Division was in a fight where they lost a battalion a day, they'd be out of the fight in 9 days. That's it. No more 1st Marine Division. So the Ukrainians have been fighting in Bakhmut for a long time, suffering this kind of casualties. It's absurd what's going on. But the battle has significant operational realities attached to it. If the Russians are able to break Bakhmut, this is the most heavily fortified spot in the Ukrainian defensive belt in the Donbass and Donetsk. It's like cutting the Gordian knot, so to speak. They'll be able to penetrate and then roll up the defenses. And it's also, this has become almost symbolic, like Stalingrad was in World War II, where the Germans, rather than flanking it, getting across the Volga River, surrounding Stalingrad and pushing on, decided to get involved in a fight in the city, and they just kept pouring resources and resources and resources in. And the Russians did the same, and you ended up with this meat grinder operation where the Russians again were just grinding up the Germans, and they outflanked them and surrounded them. I think the Ukrainians have made a decision that Bakhmut's not going to fall, that they're going to fight it literally to the death, and they are throwing in their reserves. Bakhmut is going to fall. It'll fall at a time and place when the Russians want it to, when it's convenient to the Russian victory. Remember, the Russians are still bringing to the battlefield 10 to 15 division equivalents of troops that were mobilized and equipped. And if you take a look at the equipment that's coming in, I mean, anybody who bought into that the notion that Russia is running out of equipment, I don't know. Look at those trains; they don't seem to be running out of equipment. That's all new tanks too. They're not scraping up the old T-64s from the Cold War. These are T-90s, T-80s. This is the real deal that's coming in. And once the Russians get their forces positioned, anybody who's been in the military knows the following thing: you don't train, and then get ready to launch the attack and then sit. All that training goes to hell in a handbasket. The longer the troops sit, the less effective they become. They lost that edge. Elite troops, shock troops, they need to be in motion. They have to be working. If you let them sit, anybody who's watched what happens when a lance corporal sits on his butt for too long understands nothing good happens. So the Russians have an army full of lance corporal equivalents that are being pushed forward. They're not going to let these guys sit. When they come, they'll time the arrival, I believe, at the moment when they want to break through these defenses in Bakhmut, so that you have everything happening in a flow. There's no pause. You never let the enemy rest. Never let the enemy rest. As famous scene in the movie Patton, where George C. Scott quoting Patton, you want to grab him by the nose and kick him in the ass all the way around you. So that's what the Russians are going to are preparing to do to the Ukrainians. This is not going to be pretty. It's going to be devastating for the Ukrainians. The casualty levels that they've suffered now are going to pale in comparison to what they're about to suffer. Again, bringing up a World War II analogy, I liken to what I believe is about to happen to the destruction of Army Group Center, the collapse of the German front in front of Moscow in the summer of 1944, where the Germans were defending. Then the Russians, the Soviets broke through. And when they broke through, they just kept going. And the Germans couldn't run away fast enough. They were slaughtered on the battlefield, overrun. An entire army group, that is several armies, were annihilated. And I think this is about to happen to Europe's second largest military, the Ukraine.
Operation Bagration.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is, recently the U.S. and Russian exchanged prisoners. The U.S. traded Victor Bout, also known as the Merchant of Death, for Brittany Griner, a WNBA basketball player. Can you please explain to those in the audience who Victor Bout is and what crime or crimes he was charged with? Also, what are your thoughts on this whole situation, and can you elaborate on how and why we or our commander-in-chief would allow a dedicated Marine to be left behind as well? Talking about Whelan.
First of all, let's just compare and contrast Whelan with Brittany Griner. She's a professional athlete of some renown. She's won championships with the U.S. Olympic team. She's a college basketball standout. She's a professional basketball player of immense talent. And she was arrested on narcotics possession charges in Russia. And in Russia, they don't mess around. In the United States, I think we all recognize that she probably would have been gotten off with a slap on the hand or nothing. It appeared to be an accident. I'm not here trying to say that Brittany Griner did anything malicious with intent. I think she literally made a mistake. There was something in her bags that shouldn't have been in her bags. but the Russians take drug trafficking seriously, and frankly speaking, it's a bad time to get arrested in Russia if you're an American. I don't like games being played with legal systems, but from the Russian perspective, if you're going to tee it up, they're going to hit it out of the park. And Brittany Griner teed herself up. She got arrested, and then the media. The biggest mistake that the media made, I believe, was hyping this thing up, raising her, because this probably could have been something that could have been resolved in a very low-key manner by the Russian courts. But once you publicize it, the Russians aren't in the business of doing America any favors at this point in time. So I think she got caught up in the politicization of the situation, and she was given a very harsh sentence. It was clear she was never going to serve out this sentence. 100% certainty she wasn't going to serve out the sentence. What they were doing is turning her into an asset. Now they have an asset, and they say, we want something for this asset that you have placed high value on. You, the United States, have turned Brittany Griner into this $1 million resource, so we want $1 million in return, or maybe $2 million. We want a good deal. And they got Victor Bout, arms dealer, who, if you, I believe he served as the inspiration for Nicolas Cage's character in the movie
Lord of War.
Lord of War, yeah. Of course, that's a movie, it's dramatization, but this is the role that Victor Bout played in moving weaponry back in the 1990s, and such. And people of that, of that skill set are useful to governments. They can do things that governments may not want their hands on, but providing support for different entities around the world that need support to pursue the national security objectives of the nation, but it's inconvenient to be directly involved. So he has a role to play, and he played that role very, very well. And he was arrested and sentenced to a very lengthy sentence here in the United States. He had served over half that sentence, I believe. He'd done 10 years of hard time. And this is a guy who's in federal prison with a target on his back. I mean, the U.S. government's not here to make his life easy. And I think the Russians wanted him home. And so they offered up Brittany Griner. The mistake the United States made, I guess, is putting too much emphasis on, Hollywood or the media, and not enough emphasis on Paul Whelan. I can't speak to Whelan's case in an informed manner. Apparently, he met with somebody, and they handed him a flash drive that contained secrets. Whelan claims he wasn't shopping for secrets, and that this was a setup. Possibly. Again, not a good time to be American in Russia doing stupid things. If you're going to go to Russia, you better keep your nose as clean as possible. You better not do anything. There ain't freedom of speech. There ain't freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of anything if you're an American in Russia. You're a foreigner in a country that your government's treating as a de facto hostile country. And understand that if you make a mistake, you become a pawn in the bigger game. The Russians accuse him of espionage. What's interesting how the Russians sell this is, they are talking about him as a hero of the American fatherland, how he served his country but has been abandoned by his masters, whereas Brittany was some sort of basketball playing whatever. And again, I personally I don't believe that Whelan was controlled by the United States. I don't believe that he was acting under the direction of the CIA, because that's just not how the CIA operates. You don't go into a public place meeting someone, receive a hard drive that was set up through online communication. I mean, that's just not how it's done. I don't know how the CIA does it today, but if you read the books about in Soviet times, you have covert communications, you have a dead drop, you leave a mark, they come in, they service the dead drop, they leave a mark, meaning it's there. You have teams doing reconnaissance, making sure nobody was followed, nobody's thing. Then you come in and you recover it and you get it back to the embassy as soon as possible, but you avoid the face-to-face like this. It's just stupid. So if he was CIA or controlled by U.S. intelligence, man, we've really lost our tradecraft. I just think that he was a guy who was trying to gather information and got himself in an environment where he may have been set up. I don't know what was on that flash drive. The Russians aren't very good in trial releasing all this kind of information because it's national secrets and all that. But, I think he was set up. I don't think he was out there to do harm to Russia, but he has the profile. He's a Marine. He's traveling over to Russia frequently, and he's having this meeting. It fits a certain profile, and he got arrested, and now he's paying the price for being stupid, I believe. Now, what price? Because if he was a CIA guy, a real CIA guy, we would be bending over backwards to get him out of that country. I mean, for any number of reasons. One, understand that if he was a real CIA guy, he's gone through some very special training. And especially if he was working in Moscow, he knows everything about the Moscow operation. Now, normally you wouldn't want to put somebody into Moscow like that unless they have diplomatic cover, meaning that if they get arrested, they have to be released, and so the Russians don't get into their head. So are they trying to tell me that he was under a knock, non-official cover, which is a deniable thing? But even then, knocks receive very special training. They know some things that you don't want to leave a knock languishing in a Russian prison for that long. You want them out. So the U.S. isn't bending over backwards to get this guy out. And the Russians now are doing sort of the reverse card. The Russians are trying to turn Whelan into a media issue. They're trying to elevate him as this hero who's done this. They're trying to increase his value because the Russians do have what they consider to be a hero in Western custody. And this is a Russian/Chechen officer in German prison for the crime of assassinating a dissident in Berlin. I think the Russians want him out. But they need the United States to put pressure on Germany to release him to American custody and then trade him for Whelan. Right now, Whelan doesn't have the political oomph behind his name to be worthy of that kind of exchange, because this would be the United States really leaning on Germany hard. But the longer this goes out, and especially now that Griner's been released, and you have everybody asking the question, why Griner, why not Whelan? Why is Whelan languishing in prison? What's going on with Whelan? And the more this conversation takes place, the bigger the political burden is attached to his name, and the pressure is going to be put on the Biden administration to cut a deal. And so, I just think Russia's played this brilliantly from the Russian perspective. They got rid of a basketball player who has no value to them. They really didn't want her in jail. They got Victor Bout out. He's home with his family. That's a big victory. And now they got this other useless card, Whelan. They know he's not a spy. They know he's not a spy. They know the truth. They know what happened. But they're going to turn him into something to get this other guy out. So the Russians are getting, A-team players, the A-team, the big names. They're getting them. They're trying to get them back, and they're giving up scrubs, people that mean nothing to them.
Okay, next question. Scott, what are the three most mind-blowing insights that you've gained from interviewing the Russian guests on your show?
Wow, good question. I wish I had more time to prepare for that, because I'm going to pick three. I'm going to answer it, but what's going to happen tonight at 2:00 in the morning. I went, oh no, that was a better one. I should have done that. So, I'll go. Let me start off by, I guess one of the big ones was when I interviewed Khodorkovsky, the former SBU guy who now is the battalion commander of the Vostok Battalion, frontline combatant. And his pushback when I talked about the separatists in the Donbass, and I've always used that term, the separatists. So he said, we're not separatists. What the hell are you talking about? I said, we're patriots. Separatists are traitors. Separatists are people who are trying to break away from a constitutionally established order. I said, no, we're the defenders of the Constitution. We're the defenders of Viktor Yanukovych, the constitutionally elected president, who was ousted by a CIA EU-backed coup, illegal coup in February 2014. We rallied in defense of Ukraine against this outside intervention. And just that mindset. I mean, this, and this wasn't just propaganda. He believed it. He took umbrage over the concept that they were separatists. And this, to be honest, changes everything. From a moral and legal standpoint, because a lot of people kept saying, well, this is an internal conflict between the Ukrainian government and these separatists, these traitors. But flip it now. It's a conflict between the defenders of Ukrainian constitutionality and the legitimacy of the constitutional order and a foreign-backed coup that was hijacked by Nazis. And he's 100% correct. 100% correct. And I think that there has to be a better job of educating, I think, the general audience on the distinction between being a separatist and being a patriot. Separatists trying to break away. And if you're trying to break away, from the American perspective, it's like the Union in the South. And we can come up with all the arguments you want, about the legitimacy of the Southern cause constitutionally and all this stuff. But the bottom line is, from the Union perspective, the South were committing treason, breaking away, and there was a need to fight a war to bring them in. But in this case, the Union isn't forces from Kiev. The forces from Kiev are the insurrectionists, the traitors, the treasonists, the Nazis. The Union, the good guys, are the constitutionalists who are defending the constitutional order and the former president from these outsiders. And once again, it just shows how the United States has aligned itself with it. Now, we instigated the coup. We knew what we were doing, but we're on the wrong side of history. The right side of history are the people that are fighting in defense of the rights of the ethnic Russians, of the old constitutional order, of the institution of law. Because otherwise, it just basically you're saying that Nazis can come in and take over any government that you want and carry out cultural genocide without repercussion, because that's what the United States is promulgating. These people are, such as Khodorkovsky, are true patriots, standing up and putting it all on the line in defense of a cause that they not only believe in, but from a legal perspective is the right cause, the defense of constitutional order. So all these Americans that claim, I'm about the Constitution, I'm about the Constitution, then you should be on the side of the constitutionalists who are opposing the Nazi insurrectionists that are now ensconced in Kiev. So that would be number one. Number two, I mean, there's so many, but I think also the issue of Wagner, and what is Wagner? In the West we call it this mercenary group. We always talk about Wagner as a private military contractor, etc. And that appears to be the furthest thing from the truth. It appears that Wagner is an entity that is directed by the general staff of the Russian military. Wagner serves a purpose. It was created in 2014 when when this coup took place as a vehicle for Russia to provide trained military response in support of the constitutionalists in Donbass. Legally speaking, the Russians, without parliamentary approval and specific, presidential decrees, created a warlike situation in Ukraine. Russian troops can't be involved. So how do you get Russian military aid into the Donbass? You create this extra legal entity called Wagner. The Russian military at the time is a contract military. It's just like it is today, primarily. There's some conscripts, but primarily contract, which means it's like any volunteer force. You go in, you say, I want to sign up for this period of time, and they're going to pay you this amount of money, and you go in. Wagner is just a different contract vehicle. It's one that, instead of being attached to the regular Russian military, it's attached to a different funding resource. And it allows the Russians to put highly trained personnel on the ground in a place where otherwise Russian troops would not legally be allowed to be. And we see them doing the same thing in Syria and in Africa and then elsewhere. But I think that explains a lot. I mean, if you take a look for, one of the most decisive battles of the war right now is the battle for Bakhmut, which we talked about earlier, the defensive line. On the Russian side, one of the leading forces participating in the assault on Bakhmut is Wagner. These guys are the tip of the spear. Mercenaries don't generally go to the tip of the spear. Why? Because mercenaries are fighting for money. When you fight for money, it means you want to live so you can spend the money. Wagner's not fighting for money. Yeah, they're contract soldiers. They're fighting for a cause. And some of the leading units, the assault units of Wagner are suffering 60% casualties. So if your job is, if you're fighting for money, understand 6 out of 10 ain't spending that paycheck. Ain't spending that paycheck. And yet they continue to come up and continue to fight. Why? Because they believe. They believe in the cause. That's not a mercenary outfit. Mercenaries don't believe in the cause. Mercenaries don't push forward aggressively, sacrificing their life to achieve an objective linked to the state. That's not what mercenaries do. Mercenaries have no state. Mercenaries only have greed and money. Doesn't mean they don't die, but it also means that when they go into combat, they don't like to be in a position where they're going to die. So to call Wagner mercenaries is just absurd in the extreme, and I think that the West has gotten it totally wrong about Wagner. And I think that was one of the bigger, gotcha moments too. It's just like, wow, geez, we need to reevaluate how we interpret these. Because again, if you view them as mercenaries, you're going to be shocked as poop when they come through the line at you, because they're coming at you with fixed bayonets, ready to give their lives for their country. And when was the last time you saw a mercenary ready to give their life for what country? They don't believe in Ukraine. They only believe in the dollar. And they don't want to give their life because then you don't get to spend the money. So, Wagner is orders of magnitude better. These are some of the best assault troops that the Russians have. And again, I'm not sitting here, pretending they're the best thing since sliced bread. I'm just saying that from a realistic position, if you're evaluating the situation, you better have a good definition of who they are, because if you aren't defining the problem properly, you're never going to come up with a solution to it. And if you treat Wagner as a mercenary group, they're going to kill you every time. I'd say the third one, I just had an interesting talk with an economist, and he said something fascinating about what's going on with the European economic collapse. I was trying to get him to talk about the Russian plan, how the Russians anticipated the sanctioning of them, and how they boomeranged it back on Europe, and Europe's suffering, and what the Russian thinking was, how to accomplish that. And he said, no, you got this all wrong. He said, this isn't about Russia doing it, it's about the United States doing it. He said, "This is part of an American plan that predates the Ukraine conflict that seeks to destroy the European Union as potential competition." And first, I'm never going to be rude to people who come on and talk because the idea is to get, in my opinion, the idea is to get their opinion out there and let them articulate it so that people can evaluate it. But in my mind, I'm just going, that's a little tough for me to believe. But then the longer you think about it, it's the only thing that makes sense. This is a concerted strategy on the part of the United States to destroy the European Union. Because that's literally what's happening. That's literally what's happening. And everything the United States does furthers that end without harming Russia. Russia is winning. Russia is going to emerge victorious. And you'd think that the Americans sit there and go, oh man, everything we're doing is wrong. We need to change what we're doing. We need to shake it up. That's what you do when you're losing. You know this, you're in the military, you're getting your butt kicked, boom, boom, boom. The commanders don't go, do it again. Well, I'm commander, good commanders aren't going to say, do it again, do it again, do it again. The good commanders are going to go, holy crap, Sergeant Major, what the hell are we doing wrong? Come in here, guys. What's going on? Why are we losing? Boom, boom, boom. Okay, let's make this adjustment, boom, boom, boom. Okay, let's try it again. Boom, good, we're winning. Keep push. And you change, and you adapt, and you overcome. Well, we're not doing that in Europe. We're just basically saying, what, your economy's collapsing? Let's continue to do that which caused it to collapse. Let's double down on stupid. Except if the goal is to collapse the European economy, then it ain't doubling down on stupid. It's being pretty smart. It's very good American policy. I don't know that I believe that yet. I'm not there. I mean, I've got a lot of, I kind of worked that through my head a little bit. But that was one of those moments where I went, wow, that makes sense. It's so insane that I can't just go in and embrace it. Because, I mean, if this is true, then why does Europe ever trust the United States again? And why would they ever trust? And so in order for it to be true, the United States has to be on the road of a decisive break with Europe, which is the direction we're heading. We already see the French and the Germans saying, hey, this is an unfair relationship. We're spending so much on energy. You're stealing our industry. How are we going to change this thing? And the United States isn't doing anything to pay attention to their concerns. So that was a big wake up moment. That was one that, again, I haven't resolved it yet. I'm still doing a lot. I'm not a good economist. I'm a Marine, and I have trouble balancing my own budget. So the idea that I'm going to, suddenly be conversant in, macro, micro, economics and theories and this and that, no. But I do know how to read, and I do know how to think. And so I'm digging into this thing, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. But that you asked, the wake, the moment. That was one of the moments right there.
So it sounds like it's just pushing Europe. I think the end result is it sounds like Europe will be pushed towards Russia once they wake up and realize that the United States is not their friend.
I think the American goal is to destroy according to this economist, is not to push them in our, because look at Russia. Russia doesn't want them. Russia doesn't want Europe anymore. Russia doesn't care about Europe anymore. Russia despises Europe. They despise Europe's independence, foreign policy, its slavish, submission to America, etc. Europe Russia's pivoting east. The currency they're worried about, or that they're concerned about, is the yuan, the rupee. The last thing they care about right now is the euro or the dollar. But America was concerned about the euro and the ability of the euro to compete against the dollar, especially in a decline. And this is the guy's philosophy. The global environment where the petrodollar is in decline. For the dollar to remain relevant, and that's inherently important for the survival of the American economy, is to keep this overhyped piece of paper that's backed by literally nothing of value. You need to, I guess, retreat away from the dominance of the globe, which is what the petrodollar was about, and now become instead regionally dominant. To have a collection of nations that the dollar is the dominant currency. and then the rest of the world will break up into, the Chinese currency, the Russian currency, the Indian currency, the Brazilian currency, things of that nature. And the idea was to destroy the euro as a viable currency, compel Europe to go back to individual national currencies, which will be subordinated to the dollar. So the dollar will become the mark upon which these currencies act, and that gives America some regional dominance. So the idea is to break the economic independence of Europe, make Europe, very much dependent upon the American economy and the dollar. That's the guy's theory, and so I like I said, I got to dig a little bit deeper. I'm my knowledge of economics is very superficial.
Sounds
I
about
know that
right.
there's 100 pennies in a dollar, but sometimes it feels like there's only 97.
Okay, Juan, your turn.
Yes. Though Russia does seem to be winning this war against Ukraine, the Ukrainians also, on the other hand, seem to be putting up a good fight. Does Russia need to use nuclear weapons to win this war once and for all? If so, what do you think will lead to Russia's use of nuclear weapons?
Well, the easiest part of the question is Russia doesn't need to use nuclear weapons, and Russia won't use nuclear weapons in this war. This is not a nuclear conflict per Russian doctrine. There's nothing about what's going on in Ukraine right now that would prompt Russia to use nuclear war or weapons. By doctrine, Russia, can only use nuclear weapons if they're attacked by nuclear weapons, or if an enemy assembles conventional forces that are capable of threatening the existence, the existential survival of Russia, meaning driving on a major Russian city like Moscow or St. Petersburg, then Russia would use nuclear weapons. But if Russia used nuclear weapons, in that result, they wouldn't be tactical. They would be strategic. They would use them against the decision-making centers of these nations. So Berlin, Paris, London, Washington, D.C., things of that nature. So the Ukraine conflict isn't going to generate a nuclear conflict unless the West does something stupid, like think that it can use nuclear weapons or the threat of nuclear weapons against Russia. And this is something that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, spoke about recently. He said, we won't be the first to use nuclear weapons. He said, but we won't be the second to use them either. Now, what does that mean? That means that the moment Russia detects nuclear weapons coming their direction, they're not going to wait for these weapons to impact their soil. So it's launch on detection. Detect, launch, now Russian missiles cross, and both sides disappear. But the Russians said, okay, we're comfortable with that scenario. But now what the Americans are doing is embracing the ability to conduct preemptive strikes using advanced technology, etc., where they can decapitate Russian leadership and they can launch a preemptive strike hitting Russian strategic nuclear resources, bombers, and the airfields, hit the submarines in the ocean, hit the silos, and hit them massively early on, eliminating Russia's ability to launch its own retaliatory strike. And then with missile defense, any Russian missiles that survive could be shot down by missile defense. And this creates an incentive for the United States to carry out a preemptive strike against Russia. And therefore, Russia's launch on detect strategy is no longer viable, because the whole idea of preemption would be that if you get it by the time the Russians detect it, it's too late. They've lost everything. So what Putin said is maybe we need to develop our own preemption capabilities so that we're the ones threatening the West with nuclear preemption, nuclear annihilation, nuclear destruction. And if that's the case, then now we have a situation where both sides are operating on a hair trigger, and any mistake made could be fatal for the entire world, and it has nothing to do with Ukraine. It has everything to do with just the fact that we have two nations armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons who are in geopolitical opposition to each other at this point in time.
Yeah, it's 1962 all over again, it seems like.
Except in 1962, the Russians could only put, I think, 6 intercontinental ballistic missiles in service. Today, put thousands. So.
Okay. Next question. Okay, so what does Scott think of possible Russian political or military expansion into Eastern Europe once they finish, quote unquote, with Ukraine?
The Russians aren't an imperialistic power. They literally aren't looking to expand their borders. They were more than happy to live with Ukraine as an independent nation, having its own sovereignty, just as long as Ukraine wasn't a member of NATO. They even were saying Ukraine can join the European Union if they want to, but just can't be a member of NATO. Because given NATO's mission and their record of deceit and things, Russia just couldn't have this anti-Russian military alliance right up on its borders. So this war is being fought to rectify that issue. But Russia has no territorial objectives in Poland. Russia, one could make a case that Russia might have territorial objectives in the Transnistria region and that breakaway part of Moldova, and that at some point in time that'll be incorporated into Russia. But that's different than saying Russia is going to occupy all of Moldova. I mean, Transnistria is a complex, relic of the Cold War history. So you have to treat it as in isolation. But even take Kaliningrad, the enclave on the Baltic. When the Soviet Union fell, Russia lost direct connectivity with Kaliningrad, and yet Russia's not in the business of saying we're going to build a land corridor through Poland and Lithuania to get to Kaliningrad. What the Russians want isn't territorial acquisition. Russians want is peace and stability through what they call a new European security framework. So I think that it isn't that Russia's going to threaten anybody to be attacked, but the Russians are going to, through their victory in Ukraine, create an imbalance in military power in Central Europe that either can be negotiated away or matched. And given the fact that the European economies are collapsing and that the state of their militaries are so egregious, I mean, the Germans are just a joke, just an absolute joke of a military. They've been trying to design this new Puma infantry fighting vehicle, and they just had to stop because it just doesn't work. And that's sort of the status with almost all of NATO. It just doesn't work. Very expensive equipment, looks good on paper, might be good for a couple-day campaign against some unarmed nation around the world, but going up against Russia, it's a different thing. So I think what Russia's looking for is to confront Europe with a new geopolitical reality that hopefully gets Europe to the negotiating table, where they will this time take seriously the offer made by Russia in December of 2021 about a new European security framework. I think that's the direction that Russia's heading. The last thing Russia's going to do is invade Poland, invade Baltics, invade Germany. That just isn't in the cards.
Not even to strong arm. Would they not do that just to teach the Europeans a lesson? Just to strong arm them and say, listen, don't try this ever again.
Well, but the Europeans have nuclear weapons. And once you attack NATO, Article 5 kicks in, and now you've turned it into an existential struggle for NATO. There's nothing about Ukraine that's an existential struggle for NATO. I mean, they're trying to make it one by investing totality of their military budget in there. But the reality is if Ukraine disappears off the face of the earth, it doesn't change anything for NATO. It doesn't make NATO weaker other than what they've sacrificed on the ground. So NATO, I don't think Russia needs to, they're not going to attack NATO. There's no reason for them to. And if they do, you've now made NATO a player. Now nuclear weapons come in, and now we're talking about the end of the world. Because again, there is no limited nuclear war. There's no such thing as a limited nuclear war, especially in the Russian mindset. So Russia's not going to engage NATO with the goal of limited escalation to de-escalation, all that. If Russia fights NATO, it's going to be a decisive battle where nuclear weapons are going to come in, and it means the world's going to end. So I don't see Russia making a move on NATO.
Sorry, Juan, I expanded a bit on that question. Go ahead.
Okay. My next question is, Russia states that any Patriot missile defense system will definitely be targeted and seen as legitimate military targets. In your opinion, do you think this is a major escalation in the war? Why or why not?
Well, I mean, politically, it's an escalation. It's part and parcel of an ongoing, approach taken by NATO to increase the scope and scale of the military assistance to Ukraine. But it's an act of absolute desperation on the part of the West. First of all, the air defense systems that are currently deployed in Ukraine aren't working. All you have to do is take a look at the way the Russians are taking apart the energy grid of Ukraine and the strategic infrastructure of Ukraine. The Patriot missile is a political ploy by the United States to appear to be doing something to meet a Ukrainian need. But the Ukrainian need is like right now, or yesterday, or the day before that, when they were getting the crap blown out of them. And it's going to be the need they need tomorrow, next week, the week after that, and the week after that. Patriot is a complex system. First of all, it doesn't work. It hasn't. Maybe it will now. Who knows? But we know during the Gulf War it didn't work, didn't shoot down the Iraqi Scuds. We know during Operation Iraqi Freedom, it shot down more Allied aircraft than Iraqi missiles. We know that the Patriot system that Saudi Arabia was using couldn't stop Houthi Iranian-supplied drones from taking out critical infrastructure of Saudi Arabia. So Patriot doesn't work. And so we're going to give it to the Ukrainians. Now, we're not going to give them the most modern variant. That would be stupid, because that would be giving the Russians access to the very technology that we need if we ever are going to go to war with Russia. So we would be giving the Ukrainians older variants, which are less capable, but still technologically demanding and require a lot of guys. 90 men to man a single Patriot battery. The S-300, which is sort of the Soviet-era equivalent, 30 men. We need 3 times as many men to do this. Now, what does that tell you? That means that the footprint of the Patriot is massive. So when it deploys, this isn't a discrete covert deployment. This is a deployment that's going to leave a footprint that's going to be detectable in any number of ways. Imagery, electronics, you name it. And then the Russians are going to destroy it. So it's a death trap. It literally is a system that isn't going to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. You can't integrate the Patriot system into the existing Soviet air defense network of Ukraine. They're incompatible system. So it's a standalone system. They're not going to give enough of them to create their own independent umbrella. So the system's going to come in. It's not going to be communicating with the Ukrainian system. There's going to be vulnerabilities, gaps. They're going to be detected and exploited by the Russians, who will destroy them. It just isn't going to work. The other thing is, it takes time to train these guys. Unless the United States has been carrying out a covert training program for Ukrainian missile defense artillerymen, this decision is going to trigger what is at a minimum 5 months. 5 months to train these guys. Now, the U.S. might have an accelerated training program. And knock 5 months down to say, 3 months. But what happens when you take training shortcuts? Again, anybody in the military knows this. There's a reason why you have a training syllabus. It's because the past has taught lessons that this thing needs to be trained. You have to get this much experience, and then you have to bring it in here, and you have to do this, and you build it up till you get the final product you want. But if you take shortcuts, that final product isn't going to be capable of doing the job, especially under duress. And understand, the moment the Patriot gets deployed to Ukraine in a combat environment, it's under duress. So any training shortcuts that are taken is just a guarantee that the Patriot's going to be destroyed even that much more quickly. So this is a tragic joke. We're offering something to Ukrainians that probably isn't ever going to be deployed, because I have a feeling that the ground war is going to be wrapped up. At least major part of the ground war is going to be wrapped up before the 5 months comes by. And we know this. I mean, we know it. So we're simply saying something to be seen as doing something, when the reality is there's nothing to be done. And if the Patriot is deployed, it's going to be destroyed. It's not a game changer at all, but it is an escalation, because then you have to ask yourself the next question. It's not going to work. Therefore, what's next? We know what the Ukrainians want. They want tanks, lots of modern tanks. Is the U.S. going to bend under the pressure and say, okay, we're going to give you modern tanks, modern infantry fighting vehicles? Again, that won't change the solution. It just throws more, wheat into the grill and into the grinder. They're going to grind it up, turn it into flour. But that's the escalation the Russians are talking about. Anytime you continue to double down and continue to pour weapons into a combat environment, you create the potential for something to go wrong, for an escalation, for direct force-on-force contact. And that's what the Russians are talking about. They're letting the Americans know, we're going to blow this stuff up the second it comes across the border. Deal with it.
And it seems like Russia has been very patient. I mean, it just seems like the West and the proxy war is they just keep. I mean, in my eyes, what I've been watching and listening and reading, and they've been very patient. Russia has been very patient.
Yeah, the Russians, back to the question about the takeaway moments from these interviews. Another one was just the overall thematic of escalation management, that the Russians, have been in the business of trying to slow this thing down, not to create, an escalation between Russia and NATO. So Russia has not overreacted to anything that NATO has done or Ukraine has done, because they've been backed by NATO. The Russian responses have always been measured. They've been, they're not rushed. The goal was to prevent the conflict from spinning out of control. So I think we're going to see the same thing with the Patriot, that the Russian response will be relatively measured, although they've said we're going to strike it. When they strike it, we'll find out. But Russia has been, their purpose has been to keep this conflict from becoming a NATO versus Russia direct conflict, when sometimes it seems like NATO's objective is to encourage that. So yeah, thanks to Russian maturity, we've avoided to this point in time a direct conflict between NATO and Russia.
Yeah, Russia seems to be the adult.
Yep.
Okay, next question. Okay, according to the RAND Corporation report, the Ukraine projects had a high risk of failure and a very low possibility of success. Begging the question, what was the objective given the stats showing a desirable outcome to be so unlikely?
Well, the objective was to strip Ukraine away from Russia, under the belief that in doing so you would fundamentally weaken Russia politically and geopolitically, and hopefully lead to Russia's collapse and demise. That's the objective. The risk was that Russia wouldn't go down without a fight, and that the fight could entail a major ground war in Ukraine, that A, could spin out of control and become a war with NATO, or B, would result in the destruction of Ukraine. So I think the RAND study was published in 2019, around that time frame. If you take a look, the Russian decision to intervene on February 24th took NATO and Ukraine by surprise. I don't mean tactical surprise. I mean, I don't think people were ready for that fight. This is why the CIA said this war will be over in a month. General Miley briefed Congress, said 70 hours Kiev is taken. And those idiot analysts like Scott Ritter was running around saying it's going to be over in a week. The Russians are going to steamroll the Ukrainians. Well, we were all wrong. It wasn't over in a week. And one of the main reasons why we were wrong is that the Russians decided they weren't going to operate doctrinally, that they were going to do this special military operation, that there's not a single person out there that said, I predict Russia's going to do a special military operation. No one predicted this. And because no one predicted it, there was no basis for assessing it. What is a special military operation? I mean, I had to go on pause and go back and study Russian history and all that stuff, study the statements and come back. And I made the conclusion that it was what they said it was. It was literally the soft approach. I was guided by a statement made by a Russian general who said, this is the Syrian solution. Now, I like it. The people in the West went, yeah, that's right, the Syrian solution. Surround them, blow the crap out of them, run them over, the Syrian solution, war crime. I went, wow, you don't really know much about the Syrian conflict, do you? You don't know how the Russians went in and actually negotiated directly. Their military police, I believe one of the great unheralded, stabilizing forces in the modern time are the Russian military police and what they did in Syria to go in and reach out to the Syrian opposition, engage them, set up ceasefires to de-escalate the conflict, and then negotiate them peacefully withdrawing from a piece of territory and relocating to Idlib province. That's the Russian. So the approach is a negotiated de-escalation, deconfliction, etc. And that's what you saw with the special military operation. There was an effort to negotiate with Ukrainian civil leadership, with Ukrainian military leadership to keep troops in the barracks, to allow the doors to be open so Russian troops could move in with minimal violence. Didn't work out everywhere. There was a lot of violence. A lot of these convoys got ahead of themselves, no flank protection, got isolated, got slaughtered. And it led to the next phase of the war. But because no one anticipated the special military operation, how do you therefore assess what appears to be a Russian defeat? Because they, you got videos of Russian convoys slaughtered. You have Russian prisoners. You have dead Russians. You have this. You have that. And NATO interpreted as a sign of Russian weakness. They said they're weak. And so NATO, this wasn't what's happening in Ukraine isn't part of a strategic strategy to suck the Russians in and chew them up as Rand suggested. This is more of, holy cow, the Russians invaded. It's all going to be over really soon. Oh, wait, it's not over. What happened? Oh, whoa, the Ukrainians are fighting. Wow, that means the Russians are weak. We need to double down, guys. We need to start giving them the heavy weapons. And that's sort of the conversation. That's what happened. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are sitting there going, whoa, we dodged a bullet. The Russians really have all this capacity. They're going to kick the living you-know-what out of us. We need to get off of this game field. Let's go to Istanbul and have a negotiated settlement that gives Russia the Donbass, gives them Crimea, and we survive as a nation state. This went too far. And NATO stepped in and said, nix on that. You ain't negotiating a peace deal here. We're going to double down on the support. We need you to defeat this weak Russian force. And so we just have one bad assessment followed by another bad assessment followed by another bad assessment in the West. And so we compelled the Ukrainians to continue a fight that we're never going to win. we emptied the arsenal of NATO pretty much into Ukraine, where they achieved some superficial gains. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think we're going to find out how, everybody's like, how quick did Russia give up Kharkiv? I don't know, about as quick as they're going to recapture Kharkiv. Because this ain't over, guys. The Russian flag's going to be flying over Izium again. It's going to be flying over Kharkov. It's going to be flying over a lot of territory where the Ukrainian flag's flying over now. It will fly over Kherson again, the city. That's just a statement of fact. But the Russians gave up territory while they absorbed this new NATO infused military, Ukrainian military, grinding it down, destroying it, paring it off, stabilizing the battlefield, bringing in reinforcements. The burn rate of Ukraine is far higher than its replenishment rate. The United States was bragging how we were going to train 800 Ukrainians every, I forget what the time period was, couple months. I'm like, well, wow, that works, America. You guys are mathematical geniuses. You're going to train 800 Ukrainians every X number of weeks when they're losing 800 Ukrainians every day. You understand that the burn rate far exceeds the replenishment rate, that Ukraine is only going to become weaker, that there's nothing you can do to change this. It will never change. The burn rate will get higher, the replenishment rate will get shorter, and eventually it's just going to wipe the Ukrainians off the face of the map. Meanwhile, with the Russians, the way they've been fighting, their burn rate is very low, 8 to 10 to 1 casualty ratios. Now, when you're killing 800 or inflicting 800 casualties a day, if it's 10 to 1, you're still losing 80 a day. And in Vietnam, at the height of the Vietnam War, we were losing 200 plus guys a week. Again, simple Marine math, but 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 50. The Russians are losing nearly twice as many people a week than we were losing at the height of the Vietnam War. So they are suffering casualties. Let's not pretend that they're not suffering casualties. But the casualties they're suffering are far less than what the Ukrainians are suffering. And unlike the Ukrainians, the Russians have a massive replenishment factor taking place. The replenishment rate, 300,000 partial mobilization, finalizing their training, their equipping. On top of that, during the same period of time, 120,000 more volunteers. So, you're looking at potentially, 450,000 new troops coming in, joining up with 200,000 Russian troops, plus another 80,000, Donbass militia, plus Wagner, which, my God, is 30, 40,000 guys. Nobody ever factors them in. Then the Chechens, another 60,000. By the time you're done, the Russians are up to 700, 800,000 troops ready to come in and knock the snot out of the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainian model has failed egregiously. It didn't accomplish what they wanted it to accomplish. The high failure rate is what they said, is a high chance of failure. Yeah, low chance of success. Yeah, they were right. It's not going to succeed. Russia's going to win. But it wasn't done because the West said we're going to engage this option. It was done by accident. It was done by bad judgment, bad analysis, bad decision making. We sort of stumbled our way into this, as opposed to somebody saying we're going to start a conflict with Ukraine and this is going to happen. No, it didn't happen that way. We just sort of stumbled into it, and it grew out of control. And now the Russians are on the verge of what I believe is to be a strategic geopolitical victory.
Yeah.
My question is, Putin planned a rare visit to Belarus with President Lukashenko in Minsk on Monday. If you were a fly on the wall, what do you think they would be planning or discussing? Which was yesterday.
Yep. I've been the Russians would need to capture that fly, because that fly would have a lot of information. But I think it's pretty predictable what happened there. I'll tell you what's not happening. I don't believe that Russia is planning a military incursion out of Belarus into Ukraine. Not from that meeting. Because it's the same thing. If back in January, it was like, Russia's going to invade tomorrow. And I went, no, they're not. I mean, they may invade. They're not going to invade tomorrow, because Russia is a very legalistic nation. And in order for Russia to invade, they have to create the conditions that legally allow this to happen. There was a lot of things that need to happen first. For instance, the Donetsk and Lugansk would have to declare independence. That hadn't occurred in the most recent iteration. They have to declare independence, and then that would have to go to Russia, to the parliament, which would have to recognize the independence. And then it would have to go to the president, who would have to create a collective security arrangement with these new independent entities. And then with that, then Russia could, under Article 51, come up with a claim of preemptive collective security, preemptive collective self-defense to justify their action, which is exactly what they did. But it took almost a month for that to happen. You know, so it eventually happened, but everybody in January, they're going to invade tomorrow. They're going to invade tomorrow. I'm like, no, they're not, because they can't, legally speaking. The Russians are very legal. So all the people are like, the Russians are getting ready to launch a major thrust out of Belarus into Kiev. Like, no, they're not. One, Belarus doesn't want to be part of that, and they're not legally structured to be part of that. There's no union between Russia and Belarus that brings Belarus to the status of a potential co-combatant. The only way Belarus can get involved in Ukraine is if Belarus is attacked by Ukraine, or another nation does something in Ukraine that threatens the national security of Belarus, such as Poland seeking to take over Western Ukraine. Then Belarus could act. But their actions would be independent of the Russians. If Russia wants Belarus' involvement in the future, you have to join them in a union, which is what Putin was in the process of doing. You know, the union between Belarus and Russia is something that the Russians have been trying to get Belarus to engage in for a long time now. And Lukashenko has always opposed it. It's not what he wanted. But the election a couple years ago, the contested election, opened his eyes to the extent to which NATO and the European Union would go to remove him from power. He saw firsthand what happens when the West tries one of these colored revolutions and to push him out. And there was a period of time, I don't know if you remember, but you know, Lukashenko was flying around in a helicopter with body armor and a machine gun saying, bring it on. I mean, I'm going to fight to the death. I'm not giving up. The thing that saved Lukashenko was Vladimir Putin and the Russians. They came in and they provided assistance. They provided assurances. They stabilized the situation. And at that point in time, I think Lukashenko recognized that the only way forward for Belarus to survive is through union with Russia. Now, the important thing about union is it doesn't terminate Belarusian sovereignty. Belarus still exists as a sovereign, independent nation. But what it does do is create commonality in the economic sphere, commonality in the military sphere, which is very important, joint training, joint capabilities. And an interesting thing that Russia is doing right now is throwing it back in the face of NATO. You see, NATO has this independent nuclear deterrent capability, or nuclear weapons capability. Basically consists of American bombs, the B-61 bombs that are located in different areas throughout Europe, that will be married up to NATO aircraft belonging to non-nuclear nations like Germany, Italy, Netherlands, etc., Turkey. Although I don't know if the Turks still participate in it. But so in wartime, these non-nuclear nations have aircraft will be delivering nuclear bombs, part of the overall NATO nuclear umbrella, sort of gets them in the game. And it looks like Russia and Belarus are ready to have a similar capability where Russia is going to provide so-called special weapons capability that will be made available to Belarus in the times of conflict, so that Belarus aircraft and maybe even missiles would be able to deliver nuclear weapons in a general conflict with NATO. So this extends, you know, anybody who thought that Belarus could be lured away, that NATO could attack Belarus, the Baltics could come in, seize Belarus, and Russia would be able to do nothing, that's over now. It's going to be a collective security agreement. Anybody attacks Belarus, it's like NATO. An attack against Belarus is an attack against Russia. Everything comes in, including the nuclear umbrella. This is what's happening right now, and you're creating the reality of a collective security agreement so that Belarus can better do what it promised it wanted to do up front. Belarus never wanted to get involved in Ukraine. Belarus always said, our job is to protect Russia from being stabbed in the back, to prevent the Baltics, to prevent Poland, to prevent NATO from doing something up north that could harm Russia. So this, in effect, changes the entire game, because now NATO has to view, a Belarusian army of 500,000 that are getting better equipped. They're getting Iskander missiles. They're getting S-400 air defense system. Overnight, the entire NATO northern flank just changed from quantitatively and qualitatively. What exists in Belarus today is a direct threat to NATO, at least from the NATO perspective, because NATO's got nothing to handle it, nothing to deal with it. And again, I think this is part of Russia's overall policy or direction to create a reality that the only way NATO can deal with it is through negotiation, because for NATO to spend the money necessary to match what's going on in Belarus right now, they can't afford it. The other thing that happens is it creates the potential for action. Sometimes that's greater than the reality of action. Right now, Belarus, Ukrainians are all worried about this Russian military coming out of Belarus, so they're putting reserves that are needed down in the other area up to the border. You have the Ukrainian general saying, we think the Russians are going to make another effort towards Kiev. I don't think so, but I don't think they're going to come out of Belarus. I think they're going to come from Sumy. But that's okay. The Ukrainians will find that out in the near future. But the thing is, though, that the Ukrainians now have to dedicate capabilities to this. So that's what I think happened. I think this was an important first step. It's critical that it happened, but it's not about Russia trying to get Ukraine to invade or getting Belarus to invade Ukraine. It's about Russia and Belarus creating a new geopolitical reality in the north that throws NATO totally off kilter.
And then I believe that Kyiv was hit Monday. From what I read, they were hit with drones. They said they were hit with 23 were shot kamikaze drones, but 23 were sent, but I think only 18 were shot down. Did you read about that?
Well, you know what? Then the Ukrainians don't need air defense, because if you take a look at air defense systems, let's look at that rate. I mean, there's the percentage of that's a very high success rate. I mean, gosh, their air defense is perfect. They're lying through their teeth. They didn't shoot down 18. Virtually just first of all, what they shot down were probably the decoys, because the Russians have figured this thing out. Russia's been tracking the radars, the communications, the whole works. They know how the Ukrainians queue up what they're doing. So what happened on Monday is the Russians sent in a wave of decoys, and the decoys caused the Ukrainians to light up, open up their radars. And Russia's been following this, and they now they destroyed 4 S-300 radars around Kiev. Pop, pop, pop. Goodbye, baby. It's all gone. Ain't getting that one back. They did that. And if you lose your radars, you can't fire the missiles. So what's shooting down what? Did they shoot down decoys? Sure. But every strategic target that Russia designated to be hit was hit. Russia can hit anything at once, anytime at once, because there is no viable, effective air defense. If the Ukrainians were as effective as they say they were, there's no need to send the Patriot missile in, because that's a very high, effectiveness percentage. The Ukrainians are operating anywhere near that level of efficiency.
Okay. Is it my turn, Juan, or?
Yes, your turn.
Okay.
Like good cop, bad cop. I'm never gonna break. I'm never gonna.
Scott, you wrote in your book Scorpion King that in the late 1950s there was a highly publicized U.S. concern regarding the so-called missile gap with the USSR. Today, with both Russia and China possessing hypersonic missiles and an industrial capacity to produce them, why do we not hear about the new missile gap?
Well, because the first missile gap was a lie. There was no missile gap. It was an absolute lie designed to get Congress to spend billions of dollars to build an advanced missile capability. The Minuteman, it basically came down to the Minuteman missile came out of this, to replace the Atlas and the Titan, these liquid fuel missile. We got the solid propellant Minuteman missile, and we also got solid propellant missiles for the submarines, the Poseidon, etc. So, but it was a lie. There was no missile gap. The Russians never had this. Now the Russians, once we started producing missiles, we got into an arms race that eventually the Russians caught up and started building more missiles than we had. Suddenly arms control became a very interesting thing because we had to control the expansive Russian arsenal and bring it in. But the missile gap was an absolute lie. Why aren't we talking about it right now? Well, we are, but quietly, because right now the missile gap is real. And it exposes a strategic vulnerability on the part of the United States that our government can't be honest with the American people about. Because if we were honest, we'd say, if we had a fight with Taiwan and we send in the fleet, they're going to all get sunk by these hypersonic missiles that we can't defend against. We have no defense against a hypersonic missile. Our facilities in Guam and elsewhere will be hit and destroyed by hypersonic missiles that we can't defend against. That's the honest truth. And until we have a retaliatory capability capable of doing the same thing to the Chinese, the potential conflict is going to be one-sided. We also don't want to admit that the Russians right now have a missile, the Kinzhal or Dagger, hypersonic air-delivered system that we can't defend against. Everybody knows about it. Everybody knows it can't be defended, but we downplay that until we can get our Dark Eagle deployed, a hypersonic system deployed into Europe. The Russians just the other day, I think yesterday or the day before, commissioned a new regiment of road mobile ICBMs, the Yars. And the Yars is equipped with the Avangard hypersonic vehicle. And I forget how many they can fold in, 3 or 4, maybe more, into the warhead dispensing bus. So when they fire the Yars, the Yars then can release these maneuvering warheads that there's no defense against. If they're nuclear, they're going to hit the target, take them out. But the beauty of it, from the Russian perspective, is they don't have to be nuclear. They can be conventional. And now they can be used to strike, for instance, NATO headquarters will disappear from a non-conventional strike. Ramstein, where they have this big meeting all the time, this Ukraine coordinating group, that bunker can be taken out by an avant-garde system for which there is no defense. So it's Russia attacking in a non-nuclear fashion, achieving devastating results. And NATO is looking at going, we got nothing. You can't defend against it. I'm just going to give you a pro tip here. There's no such thing as missile defense. No such thing. It doesn't work. Never happened. As soon as we build it, we take 20, 30 years to conceive the idea, build it. By the time we build it, technology exists that obviates it. So the only way to defend against Russian hypersonics is develop our own hypersonics. So now we're into the mutually assured destruction phase of hypersonic activity. And then arms control people come in and say, ain't this stupid? Aren't we really stupid having spent all this money on capabilities that we can't defend against and we're all going to die? So why don't we get rid of them? Stabilize the world. And that's where we're at. But the reason why we're not talking about it is because we don't have a response to it. So we can't talk about it until we've built up a counter to it. And it's tough, especially the way our defense industry works now, where our defense industry doesn't exist to build the best things. They exist to build the most expensive things. It's all about making money for the shareholder. This is why we have the F-35 fighter. Take a look at the B-21 bomber as it goes forward. Oh, trust me, man, they're going to be doing this, that, and the other thing to make it, put another whistle on it, another bell on it, and make it sexier, and then it's not going to be able to fly. Look at the B-2 fleet. All 20 are on the ground right now because it just broke and it don't work. F-35 don't work. Crashed the other day. They were towing it. The wheel popped off. It don't work. Nothing works about it. It's very expensive. And so these hypersonics, we've been testing them for some time now. We had one literally drop off the airplane that was testing it, and it sort of broke up in flight before we even had a chance to launch. They did a successful test of a test vehicle recently, but that's just a test vehicle. Now they have to turn into an operational vehicle. We're many years away from having a viable hypersonic capability, and then we're bankrupting ourselves, because here's my prediction: we either are all going to die in a nuclear holocaust. That's a real possibility, or we're going to bankrupt ourselves building hypersonics that then we have no choice, because we can't sustain it, we can't afford it. We have no choice but to go to the negotiating table and hope the Russians and the Chinese are willing to put hypersonics on the table and come up with a mechanism to stand down. But that kind of arms control arrangement isn't going to happen until the United States changes its bullying posture in the world. The Chinese and the Russians aren't going to give up their advantages unless the United States is also saying, in addition to this, we're going to be withdrawing from this area. We're not going to be doing this. We're not going to be doing that. And we're a long way from that. The United States is going to have to suffer some major setbacks before our politicians and the American public. Because remember, we still have guys who like to paint themselves red, white, and blue, run around, shout USA, USA, USA when we win golf tournaments. So until that mindset changes, I'm not talking about losing patriotism. You should never lose patriotism. You should always be a patriot. But being an American patriot doesn't mean that you support American global hegemony. It means you support America's proper role in the world. And right now, Americans have to come up with a definition of what our proper role is right now. We have to match our objectives with our true capabilities, and more importantly today, how that meshes with the rest of the world. We never used to have to think about the rest of the world. We just assumed they were going to do whatever we wanted them to do. But now we got the rest of the world done grown up. We're like parents now that gave birth to, sextuplets, and we treat them as children. And suddenly they meet us at Christmas and go, hey guys, we're 30 years old. We ain't kids anymore. And we now have something we want to say to you about how all this thing is managed. Yeah, guess what, America? The world grew up overnight.
Okay. Juan, I think it's your turn.
Is it my turn? How much of an effect has winter played in the war so far? With much of Ukraine being without power and heat, do you think Russia will or try to end this war before springtime?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't think Russia operates on a calendar-driven theme. So I don't think Putin's saying, we need a Christmas victory, we need a New Year's victory, we need a Valentine's Day victory, we need a victory on Women's Day. Get all the military guys being good with the Russian women. Let's win a victory, and then we can all go out on hot dates on International Women's Day, March 8th. I just don't think any of that plays. I think it is, what do we need to get the job done? And how can we get the job done that maximizes their casualties, minimizes our casualties, with the certainty of victory? And when I approach my military math, look, I'll give you a little bit of background how my brain works. In the lead up to the Gulf War, I was assigned to the war gaming department of the Warfighting Center at Quantico, Virginia. And they had this giant computer called Janus, the Janus computer. And you could build. So I went to the CIA and I got the aerial photographs of the Iraqi defensive positions, and I constructed a computerized rendition of the Iraqi defenses based upon reality. And then I manned it with the Russian force, or the Iraqi force disposition, everything. And then you have to what's the morale like? What's the command and control like? What's logistical resupply like, etc. Then I had to build the Marine Force and do the same thing, and then factor in the same thing, and then bring in coalition air. What would be the impact of airstrikes in the rear? You program all this stuff in, and then you get everything lined up, and you hit play, and then you sit there and you watch it. Now you don't watch it real time because the battles take days, so you speed it up, hit play, Marines defeated. Holy cow. How did that happen? Why did we lose? How did they beat us? Did we give the Iraqis too much capability? Did we make them supermen? Let's go back and reevaluate that. Program it down, dumb down the Iraqis a little bit. And we look at the Marine force structure. Maybe we shouldn't go hey diddle diddle, hey straight up the middle. That was stupid. Right? In the Iraqi, let's modify the tactics. Let's bring in the capabilities. Boom. And Marines barely went. We gotta, how do we degrade the Iraqis more? How do we maximize? And you do it. And finally, it was Marines through. Okay, good model. Then you test the model. Did we do it accurately? What happens if this happens, that happens? But my brain became very much attuned to populating data sets with capabilities and then simulating that using the Janus model in my head. And so that's how my brain works. I'm just giving you some insight because people are like, how the hell do you come up with these assessments? I just told you. I turned my brain into a little mini Janus computer. Maybe a bad one. I'm not saying it's great. That's just how my brain works. So when I take a look at the Russian and Ukrainian situation, I'm populating the battlefield to the extent I can. Then I'm populating it with troops and I'm giving them certain capabilities. And then I'm running through the simulation in my head. And when I do that, I can't come up with a Russian victory until end of summer. It's very difficult for me. Now, that doesn't mean that the Russians aren't changing some of the parameters. Maybe they're willing to accept more casualties. So, my Janus simulation is wrong. Maybe they're bringing in more troops than I'm aware of. Maybe the Ukrainians have some secret reserves that we're not aware of, all that. But whenever I run the numbers, I can't see Russia doing what needs to be done to achieve the military victory, which isn't just territorial acquisition, but the destruction of the Ukrainian military. Can't see that happening till sometime near the end of summer. So I don't think the Russians are gunning for, a strategic victory by spring. To do that, they'd have to model their computer in a way that accepted far more casualties than I think they're politically ready to take at this point in time. I think the Russian approach is going to be very measured. It's going to be decisive, but it's going to be designed by intent to maximize Ukrainian casualties, minimize Russian casualties, while achieving the operational results that are necessary, which, in my opinion, are prioritized on the reliberation or capture of all of the Donbass, all of Donetsk, and then pushing the Ukrainians back out of artillery range of any of the Donetsk cities. And this includes also doing the same for the newly acquired Russian territories of Zaporizhia and Kherson. I think Russia is going to reclaim these territories and push the Ukrainians back. That's step one. In doing so, we're going to get into an Operation Bagration type scenario where the Ukrainians are fleeing. Why? They're broken. They're running for their lives. At that point in time, I think the Russians, I believe, their next priority is to pivot north and take Kharkiv and go as far to the west as they want to go, threatening Kiev, and maybe even threatening Kiev decisively with a big sweeping arrow. But if you threaten Kiev decisively, that means you have to be prepared to engage in a battle, and that means that Russia probably won't have the resources to finish the move down south. So I think they're going to threaten Kiev without taking Kiev, and then at that point in time, I believe the Russians are going to turn to the Ukrainians and say, this is your last chance. Right now, if the war ends, it sucks for you. You've lost Kharkiv, you've lost part of Dnipropetrovsk, you've lost Kherson, Zaporizhia forever. You ain't never getting it back. But right now you have Odessa. Right now you have an outlet to the sea. Right now you're a viable nation. Your economy can be rebuilt. You have access to the sea. Your economy can grow. You can rebuild yourself if you want to. But if you want to play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. We're giving you 24 hours to surrender. And if you don't, Odessa belongs to us. And this is derived from a statement that Vladimir Putin made to a Hungarian journalist during the Valdai process a couple months ago, where the guy said, should I visit, he sort of jokingly, should I visit Odessa? And Putin said, the sooner the better. But then, excuse me, then Putin said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Odessa could either be the key to resolving this conflict, or the key to diplomacy, or the key to our victory. And it's up to Ukraine. Ukraine can either surrender on Russian terms, keep Odessa, survive as a nation, or continue to play stupid games, and then they win the stupid prize, which is Russia sweeps through Odessa, links up to Transnistria, cuts Ukraine off from the sea, and then at that point in time, the Ukrainian military will probably be virtually eliminated. And what we're looking at is the political end game, and that is the Russians will continue a strategic air campaign until the Ukrainian government is replaced by one willing to sit down and negotiate the terms of surrender, which will include, constitutional changes that outlaw various right-wing groups, Stepan Bandera's ideology, etc., put in a pro-Russian government. And Ukraine will forever be this little agriculturally based rump state that will never again have any regional significance. That might take more time. That might require another winter bombing campaign that annihilates the electric grid and things of that nature. But I don't think Russia right now, I don't see where they're going to get the manpower to do beyond what I just described. I don't see how they can go from that into occupying Western Cape, unless the Polish are stupid and the Poles move in during this period of time between the destruction of the Ukrainian military and compelling the Ukrainian political surrender and make a move on West Ukraine. Then that's where the Belarus Union that we talked about earlier can come in and expand the conflict at that point. And at that point in time, Kiev's history. Russia's no longer going to play games. They're going to take it, and it's over. But I don't think Russia wants to get into a fight for Kiev. I don't think they want to get into a fight for Odessa. That's why I think Odessa, again, there's just a lot of assumptions made here. And I know what's going to happen is I'm giving you all this stuff. People are going to watch it. And then, of course, next week, Russia goes to Odessa instead of then, Ritter's an idiot. Okay, I was wrong. But, there is some logic behind my thinking. And I don't think the Russians want a street-to-street fight for Odessa. So why would Russia make a move towards Odessa when the Ukrainian military is still capable of a street-to-street fight? I think the Russians are more inclined to move north, destroy, and in the process, and get in the campaign that is the Operation Bagration, the destruction of the Ukrainian military, so that Odessa is literally left naked, unable to be defended. At that point in time, Russia offers Ukraine the deal, and the deal is made that much more attractive by the Ukrainian knowledge that they can't defend Odessa. They have nothing left. So they either accept this term or they lose everything. And that's why I think Russia would put Odessa near the end of this, because it's a historic city with tremendous landmarks, tremendous cultural value, and I just don't see the Russians wanting to get involved in in the kind of street fighting that we saw, for instance, in Mariupol and elsewhere, Bakhmut. So I think they would prefer to shape the situation to where the Ukrainians were unable to even, mount any defense of Odessa.
So I read this morning that in Kyiv, the drone strikes hit the train stations and the airports.
Good. I mean, when I say good, don't get me wrong here. Be careful what I say sometimes, because it comes off as being too enthusiastic for a Russian victory. But we're at the stage of this conflict right now where, if you care about the people of Ukraine, you need this conflict to end. You need the conflict to end very soon. And the only way that's going to end is through a decisive Russian victory. And that can only happen if Russia steps up its strategic air campaign along with its military operation on the ground. So anytime I see the Russians taking out more infrastructure, I support that. Not because I want to bring harm to the Ukrainian people, because I want this conflict to end. And unfortunately, we're beyond negotiated settlement. There won't be a negotiated settlement. Peace will be dictated by the Russians. And that can only happen when the Ukrainians are blasted into submission.
How likely is it that we would see Ukrainian military coup to overthrow the Zelensky regime and then enter negotiations with Moscow?
Well, this is the scenario I see happening as we speak. The Economist just had a very interesting interview session with General Zaluzhny. Zelensky was present, but to the best of my knowledge, Zelensky didn't say a word. It was all about Zaluzhny, and you got to ask yourself, wait, what's going on here? Because if you study some of the Ukrainian Telegram channels, you got to be careful because you never know which ones are spreading disinformation, or you got to be careful when you read anything. But I read a lot of them, and the general theme that comes across is that Zaluzhny is positioning himself to be a political opponent of Zelensky in the coming election. Very similar in many ways to what General McClain did in the American Civil War, where commander of the Army of the Potomac, went on to run against Abraham Lincoln in the 1863 election. So Zaluzhny is positioning himself to challenge Zelensky. I've written about this before too. I mean, back in September, I believe, I think September, October, there was a New Yorker article that could only have been written if the National Security Advisor, which means the President of the United States, approved it to be written, because there were a lot of people talking by name about things that would normally get you put in jail. So the fact that they were talking about it in a way that identified them without fear of consequence means somebody approved it, somebody greenlighted it, somebody gave them permission to speak. And the theme of that article was the de-emphasizing Zelensky and emphasizing the Ukrainian Defense Ministry and the Ukrainian military as the real power in Ukraine. And the Economist article interview did the same thing. I mean, the decision maker is Zaluzhny. Zelensky's a non-player. And Zaluzhny said some very interesting things. He said that, I mean, as any general would say, cockily, I can beat these guys. I can beat them. I got them. But you got to give me, and here comes the hard part, 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, 500. You got to give me an army. Got to give me the army I don't have. I used to have the army, but they're all dead now. I blew them all up in Kherson and Kharkiv and Bakhmut. They don't exist anymore. So for me to win, and for him, victory was he needs an army that he says can sally forth around 90 kilometers and seize the city of Melitopol, which would sever the land bridge between Crimea and the Donbass and Mother Russia, and allow the Ukrainians then to start focusing fires on Crimea proper and threaten Crimea and take Crimea. I mean, it reminds me a lot of Adolf Hitler in that movie Downfall, in the final bunker scene where he's sitting there and he's looking at the map and where's Steiner? Where's Wink? I need an attack here. I need these divisions to come and they need to attack here, and these guys need to come down here. And everybody's going.
He even says we need to retake the oil fields in Romania.
Retake the oil fields. Yeah, we can do that. But there were no divisions. They existed on paper only. Nothing could happen. And this is sort of what Zaluzhny has become. Sort of that figure. I can do this, that, and the other thing, but only with the army that doesn't exist. And even if you wanted to provide us, couldn't be ready anytime soon, especially ready in time to deal with. And here's what he talked about. The Russians coming in. And he for the first time, you have a Ukrainian general saying, yeah, these guys know how to fight. They're pretty good. And if you don't give me what I need, we ain't going to stop them. We're going to get beat. That's pretty much the takeaway from the thing. We're going to get beat by these guys because we don't have what we need to stop them, and you're not willing to provide it to us. And so this is setting the stage. And he's saying this in front of his president. The president's staying silent. You have to ask yourself, why? Well, because basically what he's saying is, he lost us this war. His job as president was to get us all this equipment. He got us overcommitted in this conflict. We're not getting the equipment we need, and we're going to get beat. And everybody needs to understand that. We're going to get beat. And at some point in time, that we're going to have to come up with a solution to this issue of getting beat, which means we're probably going to have to negotiate terms. He ain't going to be the one to do it. I am. He didn't say that. But that's and now listen to the Russians, the way the Russians respond to this. They continue to be derisive of Zelensky. They say he's a Nazi leader. I mean, and when your strategic objective is denazification and you call the Zelensky government a Nazi regime, sort of tells you what the future of Zelensky is. there ain't no future. Meanwhile, when they speak about Zaluzhny, remember, Zaluzhny's no angel. This is a guy that sat there and took a selfie with Stepan Bandera's portrait in the background. So let's not pretend that he's not a Nazi, he's not any of the bad stuff. But the Russians aren't calling him out on that. They're saying he's a very effective leader. He's fought very bravely. We have respect for him, things of that nature. Why? Because the Russians politically can't sit down and negotiate with Zelensky. I mean, Vladimir Putin is not a dictator, and he is held hostage to the whim of the Russian people at the end of the day. And, for him to, sit down and negotiate a peace with Zelensky would be a strategic defeat. Anything that left Zelensky in power would be a strategic defeat. But if you sit down and you dictate terms of surrender to the noble warrior, the man who put up a good fight, you legitimized every casualty Russia just took. You said all these losses were in a noble cause, and now we're ending the conflict against a noble warrior who is doing the right thing for his people, bringing this war to an end, bringing peace, and you've created a politically acceptable conflict termination narrative. And I think that's the direction. I think Zaluzhny recognizes this, and I think the Russians recognize this. The problem is that Zelensky still has a big power base. He's still there. He has the nationalists on his side because he's taken such a hardline position. So Zaluzhny has to be careful. He can't overplay his hand. But I think what we're seeing here is this very intricate Game of Thrones type backstabbing going on, to finally pick the one that's going to rule the seven kingdoms.
Yeah. So going back to what you discussed earlier with Russia retaking territory that they've, of course, incorporated into the Federation, does that mean that they won't go all the way to Lviv and take just completely invade the whole country? Do you not see that happening anymore?
Well, again, I mean, that's a decision. First of all, it's a huge political decision to do that. Just remember what got Russia in trouble to begin with. Not enough resources for the objectives. Basically, turning a 1,000 kilometer front into a 2,000 kilometer front without doubling your forces, you ended up with 60 to 100 men per kilometer. That's just not enough to defend. Now Russia's rectified that. They brought in reinforcements. They've built up their defensive lines. You don't see any Ukrainian victories anymore because they're all dying. The Russian defenses are solidified. Now the Russians are going to go into the offense again. But what you don't want to do is win, then lose. And what I mean by that is, and there's lessons to be learned from World War II history. In the battles for Kharkov in 1943, the winter battles, between the fall of Stalingrad and the final, solidification of the battlefield, the Russians, my history, I think it was Popov's tank army, penetrated and made a daring dash through the German lines, but then von Manstein, sends his boys in and they cut him behind, they hit him, and the army's destroyed, and the Soviets took a lot of casualties, and the Germans were able to, counterattack and restabilize the battlefield. Even though the Russians had tremendous numerical superiority. But, and what you don't want to do if you're the Russians at this point in time, especially if you believe Zaluzhny is a capable leader, is to overextend. And going to Lvov, I mean, you would have to thrust deep into Western Ukraine. How do you do that with the resources you have? Remember, every kilometer you advance, you also create 2 kilometers of flank cover that have to be protected. So you go in 40 kilometers advance, you don't just have guys 40 kilometers in, you have 2 flanks that are 40 kilometers long that have to be protected. And the more troops sent in, the wider that gets. The front, suddenly you're talking a lot of troops. And if you don't protect those flanks, you got all your combat power up front. Now the Ukrainians come in, smash out that arm, cut you off, and you've got Popov's tank army all over again getting wiped out. So I think Lvov, with the resources that Russia's putting on the battlefield right now, which I estimate to be around 700,000 troops, all told, I don't think Lvov can be taken with 700,000 troops if Russia's to do the other things, especially if Russia's going to secure. Remember, when you secure the Donbass and push 100 kilometers in, you're creating frontage that has to be defended. And if you go up and as you're going to have to do, because understand that you can't just hold Lugansk, the territory, you're going to have to push a couple 100 kilometers in, which means Kharkov is going to have to be taken. And Kharkov is a Russian city, which means you've got to go a couple 100 kilometers past that to make sure that Kharkov doesn't get shelled by, and by the time you end up doing this, you've created some frontage. Now, if you do it right, you can actually reduce your frontage because there's a big loop going down from where the Russian Federation is through to Lugansk and then the Donbass. And actually, if you do a straight line up, you actually pivot in and you consolidate the line. So, using the Russian border as an anchor point, you can draw a line that keeps you a couple 100 kilometers away from the Donbass border that could, I think, realistically represent what the Russian objectives could be going down. But even with that consolidated line, you need troops to man that to prevent the Ukrainians from doing any, because remember, if you're defending the line, the Ukrainians don't have to attack you all along the line. They just have to get, a point in the battlefield where they have momentary supremacy to break through. And if you haven't defended in depth, in addition to building up a defensive line, when they break through, they threaten your logistics, your resupply, and you suddenly collapse, and it's like a balloon deflating. Russia did that once in Kharkov. They don't want to do it again. So I don't think the Russians are going to get ahead of themselves, which means it's going to be a slow, methodical advance to achieve this. But when that's done, they may have sufficient forces at that point in time to make a run at Odessa. You can't go to Lvov without making a run at securing Odessa first. That's just stupid. You don't want to extend that way with a big force down here. You want to take Lvov, and then you're going to work up towards, or you want to take Odessa and then work up towards Lvov. But these are big frontages, require a lot of troops. So that's a long way of saying I don't think the Russians are going to be moving on Lvov. Although I've spoken to some Russian strategic thinkers that say this war doesn't end until Russian eyeballs are staring at Polish eyeballs right on the Ukrainian-Polish border. So we'll see. I'm just saying that it's a tougher proposition than it thinks. Now, if you have the total collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces, you suddenly create some opportunities that could have. But Western Ukraine is going to be openly hostile. There's real potential for guerrilla warfare in Western Ukraine, and I just don't think Russia wants to enter that kind of complication unless you're going to finish it that quick. What you don't want to do is slow roll into something and then end up like the United States and Iraq with developing insurgency that's going to be forever supplied out of Poland and the Baltics. And Russian troops are going to be dying, and it's going to get ugly because now you're going to have to go into the cities, kick down doors, and now you're American troops in Baghdad. It's the same thing. Russia doesn't want that. I don't think Russia needs that. I think that if Russia can take the territories, Odessa through Kharkiv, that little arc there, keep it far enough away, and destroy the Ukrainian military, then they can resolve the rest of this with politics, not military.
Okay, Scott. We appreciate your time. We're almost at the 2-hour mark. So I just have one more question and one statement. I don't know about James. How about you, James?
I've got like 10 more questions. I could keep going.
I know. I hear you. We appreciate your time, Scott, and you're awesome. And I just want to let you know right now that I'm gonna be sending you a card. So be expecting a card from me. I think you know what I mean. I'm gonna send you a card.
I have to call the FBI and send in the bomb squad? You threatening me, Mom?
No. No, I'm gonna be sending you a card, thank you card. I'm gonna be sending you a thank you card. But I just have one more question and then a statement, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And then I think James has a couple question or two. Okay, my last question before my statement is, the U.S. dollar has been the world's dominant currency. What are your thoughts on the BRICS nations joining together to dominate the global economy?
Well, I don't think the BRICS are trying to dominate the global economy. I think BRICS nations are the global economy. I mean, that's the reality. The whole purpose of BRICS is to take these developing economies and, by working together, challenge the hegemony of the American petrodollar and the tyranny of the American petrodollar. I mean, all these sanctions that come from anything that touches the dollar, the idea that the United States Congress believes that it has an inherent authority to impose its will on the sovereign economies of other nations simply because of a set of circumstances in history that puts the dollar as the global reserve currency. Global reserve currency is supposed to represent stability and things of that nature, but the United States is using instead as leverage to come in and dictate economic and political outcomes. And the world's tired of it. So I think that's what BRICS is about. BRICS is about leveraging the economic strength of the rest of the world in a manner that minimizes the impact of the petrodollar. But it's not about, for instance, I don't think BRICS is trying to get Americans to spend to convert to the yuan or the rupee. Dollar is a dollar. It's American currency. BRICS is a challenge. Whereas we're trying to get everybody to use the dollar, they're not trying to get us to use their currencies. They're just tired of using the dollar. That's why they've come up with a currency basket that they're going to use for energy transactions. It used to be the exclusive purview of the petrodollar. I do think we're going to see the dollar in retrograde. I think it's going to lose its dominant status globally. It'll still be a powerful currency attached to the American economy. And if the Americans, again, we come back to what we talked about, about that Russian gotcha moment. If this is about America destroying the euro so that the euro becomes part of the dollar zone, the dollar will be strengthened by that. I think the dollar is going to be looking for regional hegemony over Central America, South America, Canada, maybe even Japan. They'd like to suck Japan in, although I don't know if the Japanese will go that route yet. But I do think we're looking at a moment in history where the American empire is waning. It doesn't mean America gets defeated and we're going away. It just means that we get redefined. We're no longer going to be the preeminent global superpower. We're going to be a global power, but we're going to be matched by other powers that have their own independent economic and political and geopolitical aspirations.
Okay, if you want to go ahead, James, and I'll just ask mine later.
Yeah, one other question. I wanted to know, what do you think about the situation in Serbia? Are we likely to see an all-out war in the Balkans once again, and Russia getting pulled in? From my own view, that NATO's trying to do. Well, I say NATO. Washington is trying to draw Russia into the Balkans and maybe defeat them there, rather than, because they know they can't defeat them in Ukraine. So bring them into the Balkans somehow, and then score a minor victory, or maybe that's what they're trying to do. I don't know. What's your opinion?
First of all, I don't know how Russian troops get to the Balkans in significant numbers. There is no land connectivity, so you'd have to go through NATO countries. So I think that's sort of a non-starter right there. It's also logistically difficult to sustain. Put yourself in the Serbian mindset. You got the snot bombed out of you in 1999, and you know that can happen again. Do you want that? Because that's the inevitable outcome, is getting the snot bombed out of you. Now you put yourself in NATO shoes. They go to war against Serbia, they could lose 3,500 troops in Kosovo, because NATO sucks on the ground. Keep that in mind, that the 1999 war wasn't fought by ground troops. It was fought by the air that bombed Serbia into submission. But there was no ground-to-ground contact between the Serbians and NATO. If this thing blows up, there's going to be 3,500 NATO peacekeeping troops who are very much exposed, and NATO doesn't have anything to send in to reinforce them. So it's NATO that stands the potential of suffering a massive bloody nose on the ground if this thing blows up. So both sides recognize that this is not the desired outcome. The people that are causing the trouble are the Kosovars. They're the ones who, of course, pushed for this license plate policy that led to the current conflict. They're the ones pushing for EU membership, even though that violates standing agreements. And the reason why they're pushing is that they recognize that neither Serbia nor NATO are in a position to go to war over this. So they're trying to acquire as much advantage as they can before, I think, a resolution. They may overplay their hand, and I think they're in danger of doing that right now. I think they're in danger of alienating a lot of the European Union nations. There's 6 nations right now that don't recognize the independent status of Kosovo, and they are loath to do anything that enhances the notion of Kosovo independence. I think at the end of the day, this will be resolved diplomatically. I think that the Kosovars are going to be compelled to accept an arrangement that gives them independence, recognized by the Serbs, but in exchange, they're going to have to surrender northern Kosovo to Serbian control. That'll be reincorporated in, and there's going to have to be protections for other enclaves of Serbian populations that give them some sort of autonomy, etc. That's what I think is going to happen. I don't think war is a solution. I think both sides realize that war would be the dumbest. But you know what? Humans are stupid, and sometimes we just stumble our way into the stupid outcome instead of the smart outcome. And it's still possible this thing could become a conflict. I'm always cautious of these assessments because I know there's not going to be a war in Serbia. They're going to seek peace tomorrow. Serbia, war. Ritter's an idiot. Okay, yeah. So I'm just giving my assessment, which is I don't think either NATO or Serbia won a conflict because of remember that Janus brain that I got going? Whenever I run the conflict in my head, it's like it's a bad outcome for both. I don't think they want that. I think the Kosovars are overplaying their hand, and I think that if they want independence, they're going to have to make some compromise to the Serbs that'll be significant enough for the Serbs to give away. I think there's a growing recognition in Serbia that the Albanian population of Kosovo will never, ever, ever again be Serbian. That's just not going to happen. But the Serbs should become part of Serbia. And so I think that's the direction we're headed, some sort of compromise there.
When you say Janus, is that Janus?
Yep.
Isn't that I believe that's the god of war.
Might be.
I believe so.
I just remember it being this giant computer, and fortunately I had a bunch of really smart Marines who were computer savvy, so I would sit there and say things on, we needed to do this, we needed to do that, and the Lance Corps would go, yeah, sure. They'd make it happen. I tell you, the Marine Corps doesn't work without Lance Corporals. You know that.
Yes, I was a Lance Corporal.
Yeah, the Marine Corps doesn't work without Lance Corporals. Lieutenants and captains and majors, they think they're the smartest thing since sliced bread. They don't work without Lance Corporals. Colonels, they get up in the colonel range, lieutenant colonel, colonels, they need gunnery sergeants. That's where gunnies and master sergeants.
Masters, yes.
Yeah, that's when they click in. But for lieutenants and captains and majors, it's the Lance Corporal Mafia that runs the world, and they turn into the Corporal Mafia, which are all sergeants hate corporals with a passion because they used to be corporals and they understand what corporals stand for. My point is, I recognized early on that anything I accomplished in the Marine Corps only happened because I had really, 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 really smart Lance Corporals and Corporals out there backing me up. And this whole Janus thing was all about some really smart guys. They were able to take the stuff that I was generating in my brain and turn it into something meaningful.
Right. I had a drill instructor that was a corporal. I was surprised.
Yep.
My
lead instructor, not lead instructor, but the senior. What do they call it? No, we didn't call them drill instructors. They were sergeant instructors at Officer Candidate School. Sergeant instructors. But my sergeant instructor was a corporal. And he was a nasty piece of work.
I bet. My last statement is, we all know that a book about this war is coming in the future. If you are willing to share the key points or notes of the war, do you have so far? And not to put you on the spot, but what would be the title of your book if you had to write it today?
Ooh. Well, the thing is, I've actually been through this. I was on the verge of contracting for a book on this conflict in August. I was under a lot of pressure to do a book, and I kept saying it's not a good time to do this. And fortunately, I wrote an email to the publisher. I said, "This is wrong." I said, "There's when I said there was a game-changing moment when NATO was putting billions of dollars of equipment into the Ukrainian military, that hasn't manifested itself yet. If I write a book now, something's going to happen that's going to knock everything I said off the table. And sure enough, within a week, Ukraine made its move on Kharkiv, and had the big offensive there, and they came back and said, yeah, you're right, this is too much of a moving target. And even today, I wouldn't write a book today because the Russians are getting ready to launch a major offensive. This book isn't going to be written until the end of summer. That's the earliest it could be written. It's not going to be written until the military campaign is over with the size, because there's so many things that could happen, so many variables that could happen that change things. I mean, we're having a conversation now. If we had this conversation in March of last year, before NATO committed to tens of billions of dollars, we're having a different conversation. But once NATO commits tens of billions of dollars of heavy equipment, that changes the reality. The Danish calculation gets altered significantly. We're having a conversation, based upon the premise of, burn rates and replenishment rates. The Ukrainians are burning up everything, replenishing with nothing. Russia's burning up nothing, replenishing with everything. And my Janus calculation gives me, the result that it does. But if you change this, where suddenly there's a big replenishment rate on the part of the Ukrainians, and they reduce their burn rate, the calculation changes. The same thing, if the Russians undertake something that increases their burn rate so that it exceeds replenishment rate, suddenly you see the balance of power click over like this. I don't think that's going to happen, but we can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. There's things out there that, are the Poles going to move into Western Ukraine? Big question. What happens if Belarus comes in? What do the Baltics do with that now? What happens if the Moldovans make a move on Transnistria in concert with the Ukrainians and the Romanians in an effort to throw off the Russian campaign, compelling Russia to commit early to the Odessa wing? There's just so many variables out there that we don't know. So why would you write a book now that's going to go on the bookshelf and a week later be useless because it is talking about something that happened without a conclusion? You don't like a history that doesn't have an ending. You don't like a history that's halfway. You want a history that completes a story. So I would never write a book about this until at least the military aspect of the story is done. But I know what the title would be, because it's the title that I offered. And it's the title that I fought for. Nobody liked this title. It's called The Right Side of History. Russia's on the right side of history. And that's the name of the book, The Right Side of History. This war is going to show that Russia was on the right side of history, that everybody opposing Russia was on the wrong side of history.
Go ahead, James. I'm done.
Yeah, no, I think I'm done too. Oh, maybe one more actually. In the Middle East, do you see things stabilizing with the rearrangement of the geopolitics, like Turkey now cooperating more with Assad, the US and the Kurds are kind of, well, the Kurds are, looks like they're being about to be thrown under the bus because I think they might be losing support, certainly from Erdogan. So yeah, what's your kind of analysis?
I think the Syrian conflict is, first of all, it's never going to be terminated until you solve the problem of Idlib and the Wahhabists and the Salafists that are there. There's always and until you solve that problem, we keep talking about the defeat of ISIS. Everybody knowing ISIS ain't been defeated; it's there. You don't go driving around the Syrian desert alone at night, or you will be killed by ISIS. Be careful where you go in western Iraq and Anbar province, or you will be killed by ISIS. ISIS is there. They haven't gone away. And they'll never be destroyed until you get political stability in both Iraq and Syria, which we don't have right now. We have the unresolved issue of Iran. Israel keeps bombing Syria on a daily basis to strike Iranian targets there. Lebanon, is a big problem. Hezbollah poses a threat to Israel, and Israel, of course, poses a threat. Lebanon's unstable as hell. They've just had elections that can't produce a viable government. Iraq is very unstable right now. Which direction are they going? Muqtada al-Assad are pulling out of politics. Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia is getting ready to make this strategic shift to China, as being a supplier of oil to China, and opening up relations with Russia. But they still have the Iranian problem and the Houthi problem. So I think there's just a lot of problems going on in the Middle East that none are being resolved. They're being, they're treating the symptoms, not the disease. So you're putting a bandage on something, but you're not solving the problem. And I'm very fearful that the Middle East, as it has always done throughout history, will once again find a way to explode into destabilizing violence. And I also feel that the power that's going to be behind that will be, as it always has been in the recent history, the United States. I think the United States is a desperate nation clawing back against the inevitability of history, which is pushing for the decline of the American hegemony, the American global empire. And like most empires, the United States is not willing to go gently into that good night. Instead, as Dylan Thomas wrote, they will rage, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And that unfortunately means war. So I'd like to be more optimistic about the Middle East, but unfortunately I can't be. On this one, though, I will say this. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that 5 years from now, when peace is broken out, people go, Ritter's an idiot. I say, yes, I agree with you. I'm an idiot, and I'm glad I'm an idiot. I'm glad I got this one wrong. I don't want to be right on this. Because nobody wants conflict in the Middle East. Hell, I lived through a decade of that. I still, my heart bleeds for Iraq today, even though it's, quote unquote, say it's not stable. It's been permanently destabilized. We went in there and kicked an anthill, and we keep kicking it. Somehow we get off by watching red ants kill black ants. But that's not the way it should be, man.
Okay, Scott, we appreciate you so much. Hopefully we can do this next month. I know you're very busy.
Well, no, it's a privilege to be here. I just want to remind everybody that Angry Warhawk's channel will be linked in the description of this thing. And Juan, you're going to do whatever magic you do with advertising your show. And then you guys send me a link. I will get it on my pathetically small Telegram channel, and maybe you'll get more attention too. I appreciate this. I think this was a valuable 2 hours. The reason why I keep coming back is I think that there's value added here. And of course, Merry Christmas to your lovely daughter, and congratulations again for your newborn son. I hope you get some sleep, and I hope you have a lot of toys under the tree at Christmas time.
Thank you so much, Scott. We appreciate you. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Happy holidays, guys. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Have a good day today, Scott.
Thank you very much. I will do my best, and you too. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate you. And I'm gonna be sending you a letter, a card.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.